I'd like to welcome the John Jay community and distinguished guests to our wonderful campus. I'm excited to have you all here today this evening. My name is Clinton Dyer, and I'm the president of the student body here at John Jay College. When the Black Doctoral Network approached us with getting Dr. Malveaux here on the campus, we wholeheartedly embraced the opportunity. What we decided to do was make an event where Dr. Malveaux can use her experience to share with students and connect them to, as the title claims, surviving college and the next steps. We wanted her to talk about issues that students are facing right now, where it is going to school, going to work, and then wondering what career options they have afterwards. A lot of the connections that have happened within these campuses, within CUNY, is just a simple, all right, you go to class and you go to school, but what do you do after? What is the connection you can make? What is the information that you want to pass on? And having Dr. Malveaux, a brilliant person, come to the campus was something that we felt could really inspire the John Jay students and as well as the individuals visiting to go forward. With the collaboration of Student Council, the Black Doctoral Network, OER, and our Anthropology department, I'm happy to see the realization of this event. Now, Student Council has put this event on in hopes to really stretch the imagination of the John Jay students. We've done so many things so far, and we hope to turn John Jay into an academic hub where individuals from all over come and visit to speak on multitude of issues. One of the key things that we've been working on is a communication level with our faculty and students that has never been done before. The best way to describe it is a form of, I apologize. The best way to describe it would be a form of government that connects the people to the upper echelon. What we've done is create individual areas such as a game room and community committees where people get to talk directly to the people that are making the decisions for them. Right now I'm just waiting for one more individual to come in, and we're going to have Dr. Malveaux for you guys very shortly. Please hold. At this time, I'd like to introduce Anthony Carpi. He's going to be speaking on behalf of PRISM and OER.
Well, thanks so much, and thanks so much for all of you for coming. It's really a pleasure to have this type of event at the college. We've been particularly focused on undergraduate success and specifically transitioning undergraduates into graduate school. It's really been a passion of ours, if you will, trying to take our undergrads, prepare them for graduate school. We have a number of programs that we've developed in the past few years to really focus on that specific activity. In our science programs, we've been really successful in developing our undergraduate research program. That's tripled the number of students moving on from the college here to graduate and medical programs. The college has recently found an Office of Undergraduate Research to focus on some of these issues. So the idea of having a speaker like Dr. Malveaux here to talk to us about student success, the type of issues students will face in graduate school, some of her experience, some of her ideas is just really it's just a great opportunity for us to have, and I'm just delighted to be here, be able to welcome you all, and just wish you a great event. Thank you.
Well, with no further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Julianne Malveaux. She is a president emeritus of Bennett College for Women. She's an economist, author, and commentator whose popular writings has appeared in USA Today, Black Issues in Higher Education, Miss Magazine, Essence Magazine, and The Progressive, as well as many more. A committed activist and civic leader, Dr. Malveaux has held positions in women's civil rights and policy organization. Currently, she serves on the boards of the Economic Policy Institute, the Recreation Wish List Committee of Washington, D.C., and the Liberian Education Trust. She has also lectured at more than 500 colleges and universities. She is a founder of Last Word Productions, Inc. For the last 10 years, the company has centered its efforts on Dr. Malveaux's public speaking appearances, her work as a broadcast and print journalist, and author. At this time, I'd like to introduce Dr. Malveaux.
Thank you so much. Well, good evening, everyone. It's really great to be here. Thank you all, first of all, for the kind invitation. I want to thank the Doctoral Network, Deandra and Maurice, for the work that they've been doing to create a new and very important network of young folk of color, African Americans especially, but all, who are dedicating themselves to the life of the mind. It's a challenging decision to make as a person of color, to decide to dedicate yourself to the life of the mind, because you're doing something that not a lot of us have done. So I want to congratulate them. I'll come back and talk about that a little later, but let's give them a hand. And then I want to thank, of course, John Jay College for the invitation to be here. I always love being with young people, just because. Hopefully you all will ask me some questions that will force me to learn something. And that's what questions do, is that they force you to learn something. I remember once when I was back in the long ago day when I was teaching economics, and we're talking about wage discrimination. And a student said to me, well, why did black people let themselves be paid so poorly? So I counted to 10. And I said, I'll be right back. And I came back and said, okay, let's break this down. But the concepts of the freedoms that we have now and freedoms that people had at another time are so totally different that, right now you say, okay, take this job and you know what with it. But now folks are like, okay, this is the best that I can do. Reading a book today about John F. Kennedy and his relationship with the African American community before the assassination of Martin Luther King. And many people don't think that he was as involved in the civil rights movement as he was, but he really was. There was a lot of, well, it goes without saying, there was a lot of racism in Boston. And he was very active in attempting to get the Boston streetcars to get black men to be allowed to drive the streetcars. Now that was something he wasn't super successful at, but it was something that he had worked on. He worked on the civil rights movement. But what amazes me is that he also was very highly attuned to what was happening in Washington, D.C., because he lived there. And Washington, D.C., although majority African American, well, we're still not free in Washington. We still don't get to vote for president. We still don't get to vote. I mean, we're colonized people. We have a non-voting representative in the House of Representatives, Eleanor Holmes Norton, but our basic voices and votes don't count. So we have come a long way and we haven't. But the Kennedy interaction in Washington is fascinating. And from a contextual perspective, it reminded me that there was a time when we didn't have a mayor. Congress appointed the D.C. mayor. Congress appointed anyone involved in education in Washington, D.C. We were just there. And so contextually, you look at how did you let yourself get paid and how do you let yourself not vote? And then look at convicts today. There's some very fascinating kinds of parallels, but I digress. I just came to talk a while. Maurice said I was supposed to talk about getting through college. I said, but they in college. They don't need to know how to get through college. So I'm going to take that point both literally and figuratively in speaking to you this evening. I think am calling my talk How I Got Over. Now, the I that got over is not necessarily me, but the question of how I got over is a contextual question of how, in the context of public policy that is inimical, do we, black and brown people, underrepresented people, poor people. How do we get over? How do we make it happen? Because you see, right now, we would look at those over 25 in the African American community and find that 18% are college graduates. Among Latinos, it's 12%. But among whites, it's close to 30%. Among Asians, close to 40%. If you went back 20, 30 years, the numbers among African Americans would be even smaller. What changed and what's not changing? Because right now, lots of things are not changing. In fact, we're almost going backwards when we look at some of the educational issues. Many of you, I hope, followed the news today as Senator Patty Murray and, what's that man's name? I always try to forget it. Okay, that's not nice. Ryan Paul. Paul Ryan, okay. See? Didn't do it on purpose. But anyway, they finally ironed out something that resembles a budget. They will raise federal spending about 3% a year for the next 2 years, but they haven't dealt with the debt ceiling, which must be dealt with by March, or here we go again with this whole sequester thing. I don't think that the budget changes that they've made are substantive, frankly. That's my opinion. But I think that at least we don't have them fighting. But isn't it pitiful when you pay people to work and you say, well, at least they're not fighting? You know, it's sort of like when you have your kids and, you know, say, well, you know, yeah, I broke the sugar bowl, but at least I didn't throw the salt shaker across the room. You know, there's got to be some standard somewhere. So I think it's sad. The other thing that's happened is, of course, they plan to recess tomorrow. They're going to go out without extending unemployment benefits, which means that there will be 1.3 million people who will be cut off of unemployment as of December 28th. Many of them in states like California and Nevada and Illinois, where essentially the unemployment rates are much higher than those nationally. Nationally, we're at 7%. States like California, you're hitting on 10, 11. North Carolina, where I used to live, North Carolina is a fascinating place. The legislature, for the first time in, I don't know, probably captivity, it's at least 80 years, is Republican top and down, so for the first time forever. So they have actually passed a law that says you can now, used to have to be 300 feet away from a school, a bar, or something else with a firearm. Now you can be 25 feet away from a school with a firearm. What worries me more is that you can carry a firearm into a bar. Now, alcohol, firearms, and tobacco is a bureau. Some of you are criminal justice majors. They put them together and regulate them for a reason. Probably no more than one of them should be ingested at the same time. Alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. But now it's legal in North Carolina. One of my colleagues, I'm excited, is running for, one of my former faculty members is running for Congress. Malveaux was just confirmed as head of the housing agencies, and so she'll be running out, Dr. Honorable Alma Adams, but she had to clown, for want of a better, make a full spectacle of herself about 2 months ago when the Republicans decided they just were going to take away all abortion rights. Why? Because they could. So she climbed up on a desk with a hanger and started haranguing people, said, this is what you want to take me back to. Yes, she made the news, but I think she would have preferred to have comported herself with a little more dignity. I just came from Detroit, where yesterday, actually, the legislature said a woman cannot get an abortion with her health insurance unless she insured for the abortion first. So you had to know that you were going to get pregnant in order to get the insurance, in order to get the abortion, or you just have to pay for it. And you can't just use, you have to have private insurance and the public insurance from Obamacare. They passed this like by surprise, using 3% of the vote of the people, as opposed to, so it was a ballot initiative as opposed to something else. 3% of the vote, they refused to take it back to the people. So this is contextually some of what is going on. We talk about issues like freedoms. So how do you get over, if you're a woman of color with limited income and high ambition, without perhaps access to not only health care, but perhaps the clinics? Remember, there's been a war on Planned Parenthood. Now, let me tell you what Planned Parenthood does. Now, for me, that train has left the station, so I have no direct knowledge. But Planned Parenthood primarily gives people birth control information. Fewer than 3% of their dollars are used to provide abortions. As a college president, I'd send students there where they just needed to learn more about how their bodies function. If they were sexually active and they didn't want children, yes, you want them to take a pill. Because these are productive resources for our future. And because we know that single moms or single parents are more likely to raise their children in poverty than others. Now, not all are likely, but are more likely. I get in fights with people about single moms all the time because my mom is a single mom. She's raised 5 children, a PhD, 2 MBAs, a lawyer, and then a human being we call Don't Ask, Don't Tell. If you ask me anything about him, I promise not to tell you. But he is my brother. We love him dearly, and that's all. But in any case, you can't say that single moms in and of themselves are problematic. My mom has a PhD, master's of social work. She just knew how to move on sooner rather than later. Single moms do their best, and we have to lift them up, and then we have to look at the societal conditions that create single moms who have the challenges they face. Now, can you guys hear me? Am I talking loud enough? Oh, cool, because I don't sound loud enough to me, but I don't want to holler. Not very pleasant. But so in any case, it's the context of how we got over. How do we get over when we look at a Trayvon Martin, for example, and look at a young man who we don't know that much about him. He might have had a little marijuana every now and then. I'm not going to embarrass anybody by saying who hasn't. Raise your hand if you haven't had marijuana. That's kind of a leading question. Furthermore, you know, y'all are under 60, so there was a generation where we didn't think we had lived unless we had somehow at least been in the room with it. I'm not saying that I inhaled, but I said I might have passed by the room and said, oh, what's going on in there, you know. But in any case, the brother may have had a few flaws, but you get shot and killed for Skittles and a hoodie. Or the woman that they now want to send to jail for 20 years because her abusive husband came up on her and she shot a warning shot into the air. Now, if that's not standing your ground, what is? Context. Who do we pay attention to in a policy context, and what does it mean to you in terms of how I got over? For the people in this room, you're connected to the educational enterprise in one way or another. Your educators, faculty, your students. Again, you're connected to the life of the mind. The question then becomes who gets access to this life of the mind and under what terms and conditions, and what does that mean to you? By saying, who gets to think? There's this place up in upstate New York. I'm sure some of the faculty have heard of it, called Chautauqua. Been up there, anybody heard of it? It's a really cool place. Been up there twice. People just sit around and have lectures all day. They don't get graded, or they around and have, they sit around, they ride bicycles, they have lectures. The first time I went in 1989, I wrote an article when I came back called The Fine Art of Piddling. What's piddling? Having enough resources to just sit around and think. Who in the hood gets to sit around and think? How might choices be different if people had the opportunity to sit around and think? What if someone could say, what do I want to be next year? What do I want to be the year after that? What do I need to get the degree that I want? Don't you think some lives would be very different? Some folks build that into the way they live. Other folks only take vacations when they get laid off. That's not really a vacation. That's let me chill for a minute while I look for another job. So the life of the mind is something, the whole notion of the ivory tower even, the academy, is something that has been constructed to be relatively elitist. Everybody didn't get to do it. Even today, if you look at the hierarchy of our education, you've got your Ivies, your Harvards, your Princetons, your Yales. They get more dollars from the federal government for research than the bottom 50% of our colleges combined. If you took Harvard's whole endowment, it represents, well, if you took all 105 HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities, added up their endowments, represents less than 3% of Harvard's endowment. Excuse me? Less than 3%. So my friend Maurice was saying to me, how come HBCUs can't do more? And the reply would be, because, excuse my ebonics, but we ain't got no money. Now, resources often dictate and determine what we can do in education. If I had my way, every student in this country would study abroad. Every single one. When I went to Bennett, my goal was that half of the senior class, the class of 2014, would study abroad. We didn't get there, but we got to 15%. We increased international study by 800% under my leadership. But let me tell you, that was among the hardest work I've done. People have to pay more money. Tuition, room and board is already high. Where does the money come from? You have this recursive kind of conversation. Young people are not averse to traveling. They're not averse to learning languages. It's an issue of resources. And again, why are some of these things seen to be so important in some schools but not in others? If we look at K through 12 education, high schools, you can trace the moment in about 1988 when schools began to remove languages from their curriculum because they couldn't afford them. They began to remove civics from their curriculum because, I'm not sure why, to save money. Oh, that's right, it was to save money. They began to remove sports from the curriculum. Now, sports is called play well with others. You know, I flunked recess when I was in kindergarten because I don't play. I just don't. It's like, oh, is that a game? Next. But one of the things people learn in sports is how to cooperate. But what we've seen in our inner city schools is the elimination of sports. So you have young people who don't know how to talk to each other, who don't know how to resolve conflict. However, if you go to suburban schools, they would never think of removing those things. And in cities like Washington, Oakland, California, when you can look at the zip code and see the income, here's what you'll also see. In those high income zip codes, there's been educational supplementation by wealthy parents. So if parents come in and they start, the Parents League will help pay for the football, will help pay for the field trips. This is simply income-based discrimination. So how do we get over? And by getting over, what do I mean? I mean able to plan a life, to look ahead, to think about things that are desirable and good. Getting over, able to be comfortable. Not having to walk down the street or worry about whether you're going to be arrested or not for something you did not do. I don't watch junk on TV in the daytime as a rule. But occasionally when I'm traveling, I have to succumb because I don't want to burn my Kindle out by reading too much. Okay, that was a creative excuse. But in any case, I was watching something yesterday with Katie Couric, and it was a young white guy. I think his name was Ryan, red-headed, very attractive, who was in jail for 10 years for something he didn't do. Somebody lied and somebody else lied, and he ended up incarcerated. A woman got turned on to his case, and she was like a bulldog. And she was able to get one person to admit that they lied, get some forensic evidence, and basically he's been exonerated. And he was very cute from the perspective. I wasn't lusting after the young man. But he said that he wanted to spend part of his life talking about the injustices, the criminal justice system. And he said because they happen to white people too. Imagine that. It also happened to white people. Now, however, for many people, that would not, no, it's just the African Americans and Latinos who've committed all these crimes, except for the ones on Wall Street. Gee, I wonder what happened there. But in any case, the whole notion of how I got over is how people of color, people of low and moderate income, can figure out ways to create productive lives and how we can get public policy to work with us on those issues. What am I talking about? Today, when they talked about the budget, they indicated that they had not figured out that they would not extend unemployment rate insurance. They will do it if they must when they come back in January. Meanwhile, some people will have lost at least a week. Now, some may say a week is not a lot. If that's your only week's worth of money, it is. We saw many people during sequester who said, oh, it's just a couple of weeks' pay. But you saw people in credit trouble, not paying their rent, and doing other things because they missed a week's pay. That's what it's called living paycheck to paycheck, week to week, and too many Americans do it. So they're going to just pass on that. They haven't done anything about food stamps, which means that as of now, $40 billion will be cut from the food stamps program, affecting between 4 and 5 million families over the next 10 years. Not the same 4 or 5 million, but 4 to 5 million families continuously. The next thing that we're going to see happen, of course, they didn't deal with farm subsidies. Now, those of us who are urban might not care much about farm subsidies since we don't farm. But the failure to pass farm subsidies will cause the prices of milk to spike. So if you have young people, if there are issues of calcium, that's one of the issues of farm subsidy is going to happen. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, they refuse essentially to raise taxes on the wealthy and refuse to deal with a series of other issues. What we're seeing with the student loan programs, and many of you are taking out loans or have taken out loans, I'm sure, is you will see interest rates rise next year. That's just it. Unless something very major happens, you'll see those student loan interest rates rise next year. And to me, that's scary. They were at 3.4. I think now they're at 3.86. At some point, they want to go to 6.8 to simply double them. They decided not to do that. But I want to ask y'all, where's the student lobby? Where's some of y'all saying these educational loans are what I need to get the education to serve my country? Because President Obama has said that by the year 2020, we need to lead the world in educational attainment. What does that mean? We want to be the highest percentage-wise in the numbers of people who are educated in these United States. Now, if you look at people who are middle-aged, my age perhaps, not perhaps, for real, I have to stop running away from it. Age is inevitable. I'd rather be 6'0" than 6 feet under. That's my line. But in any case, folks who are between 55 and 64, 40% of us have either an AA or a BA degree. 40% of the people between 55 and 64. That's everybody together, not black or white or anything else. It's just 40% of all Americans. Look at people 25 to 34. What's the number? It's also 40%, which means that in a 30-year period, we've not improved the way we educate people. We haven't done anything different to the 35 to 44-year-olds than we did to the 55 to 64-year-olds. But what's different? The younger cohort is more diverse. They have been exposed to different kinds of learning. They don't all want to do traditional learning. We've learned so much more about learning styles over the years. Some people can sit and be talked to. Somebody sitting back there is getting ready to get up and start walking around because you learn better when you're moving. Somebody is drawing pictures. I hope you don't let me see them. Others are taking notes. We all learn things differently. But we have not taken that learning technology and used it to increase the level of education for the 25, 34-year-olds, which means Ireland is out-educating us. North and South Korea are out-educating us. Now, I am not a jingoist by any stretch of the imagination. I'm not mad at North and South Korea. If they have enough sense to use their resources to educate their citizens, right on. But when you tell me that Portugal, never mind. Okay, I'm getting there now. Portugal is not even in the G8, but they're doing better than we are. Again, I'm not dissing Portugal. I'm wondering why we don't think we should use a greater number of our resources for education. We say that education is our future. I'm just wondering why we're not doing that. And then we're wondering why we have increasing poverty and a number of other things. So this Congress has made some decisions about what they're not going to do. The other thing that they're not going to tackle is a minimum wage piece of legislation, although this fall we've seen a number of boycotts and protests from the McDonald's workers, from the other retail workers, from the Walgreens workers about the small numbers of money they earn. Now, Walmart, I'm on tape, so Walmart cracks me up. I'm going to say watching TV on Thanksgiving. I didn't want to eat too much, so I was watching TV as an avoidance mechanism. And they had about 4 or 5 different Walmart commercials. I was promoted. I get my health insurance. Yeah, right. If you spent all that money that you spent on commercials, paying somebody, you might not find picket signs outside your stores. It's amazing to me how Walmart has been so manipulative with the media. So back in October, they say they're going to allow their gay and lesbian workers to have same-sex marriage equality. They'll cover them under their partners, under their health plans and everything else. Guess what they didn't tell you? Only if they worked more than a certain number of hours a week. Nearly half of all Walmart workers work half-time. They don't get health benefits. So the thing that's keeping you from getting health benefits is not that you're GBLT, it's that you don't work full-time. But that's not the story that you're going to get. But when we see this as the largest employer in our nation, and when many people, 1 in 7 African-American women with a bachelor's degree work in some form of a clerical occupation, higher than any other group of women with education because of lack of opportunity. There are no other jobs. A lot of people are doing, I mean, that particular piece of data is not that alarming when you consider what? You have all kind of people working at McDonald's and in fast food places. You have lots of people who used to make 6 figures who are now making 4. I had got my comeuppance the other day when I volunteer at a food bank in D.C. every now and then, and a woman rolls up in her Mercedes. And I'm sitting there saying, you have a Mercedes and you want some of this food? But I have just been taking my time to bag up. Now, I didn't say anything. I just kind of looked like, But, you know, I'm sure she could read minds because, you know, I wasn't trying to play poker. And so when she came up, she asked me, could she get a second bag? I said, sure, go ahead. And she said, I know you think I have a lot of money. I'm like, well, I am looking at that Benz now that you mentioned it. And she said, and I haven't worked in 2 years. I'm like, okay, so much for assumptions. She bought the Benz when she had money. But so you have a lot of people who used to have money who don't have it anymore. Even though people keep telling us the economy is doing better, you know, unemployment rate down to 7%, Black unemployment rate down to 12.5, Latino rate down to about 9.1, so therefore we're doing better. That's what's being said. And Wall Street is going crazy. It looks like a GDP growth is occurring. And so we don't want to expand or extend unemployment benefits, even though extending them would have the effect implicitly of keeping 200,000 people out of poverty and their families. We still don't want to do that. We're looking at an economy that's a bifurcated economy. It's good for some people, it's very good for some people, and it's not good at all for others. And we've seen essentially wages relatively flat for those at the bottom and moving up for those at the top. Now, there is no, if you talk about this in the wrong company, they will tell you that you're a hater. They say it's class envy. And therefore, we shouldn't talk about the way that markets work. But markets work the way that we construct them to work. We construct them for people to get them to work. We could decide any day that we want the minimum wage to be higher. We could decide that we might want more or less rent control. I know that's a sensitive subject here in New York. You might want more or less rent control. You might decide, for example, just testified before Keith Ellison's committee about the way that the government promotes low-wage work. How does the government promote low-wage work? When you have a bidding system that says we will give the contract to the lowest bidder, what is the lowest bidder? It's the one who pays the lowest wage. So if we say to the lowest responsible bidder, that will require that bidder to say, I will pay my workers $10.50 an hour. I will pay my workers $12 an hour. It should be against the interest of public policy for someone with a federal contract to have their CEO be paid 4 times as much as President Obama, but their workers much less the average worker in the United States. Those people are basically using our tax dollars to oppress. If they're using our tax dollars to oppress, there ought to be something we do about it. We can't say the public policy just says low bid. Low bid is something that we have the ability, through the public policy we make, to quantify. And so that's how we get over at some level. We get over by understanding the role that public policy plays, but it's not just public policy. See, if I were talking to, was it Ryan Paul? Oh, Paul Ryan, I knew. If I were talking to Ryan Paul, I did it again, he would say that government should not be involved in everything. And I think he's probably right. Government shouldn't be involved in everything, but it should be involved in some things. The analogy that I use with the government and capitalism is that capitalism is like a wolf. You know, pushing for the lowest pay, the lowest is, and the government is like the dentist. Now, what happens when the wolf goes to the dentist? If it's a good dentist, some of those pointy teeth will be filed down just a bit so that the bite is not as hard, so that the good things that come from capitalism are better distributed and the bad things less well distributed. But what if the dentist is Ryan Paul? I meant Paul Ryan that time. What if that's the dentist who says, let's sharpen these teeth up a little more because we need budget reduction, we need these things and we need those things? Then we end up with a situation essentially where government is at our throat and not helping us. It's almost like young black men and the police. I don't know anyone who has a son, nephew, who has told their children, the police is your friend. If you're of color, they may tell you they have guns. Be careful. Call them if you really need them, but don't call them too often and on the wrong day, because we know what can happen when that happens. And we know that there is a narrative we have to have. The same is true of capitalism. There's a narrative. You don't tell people capitalism is your friend when you're poor. It's not your friend. Capitalism is what is keeping you poor. Now, I'm not, I don't have an alternative to capitalism. Let me say that. If I did, I'd be rich. And I think a lot of us who are, quote, redistributionists keep thinking about ways that the pie can be sliced differently. But the fact is that capitalism is the distribution system we have. The challenge then is how to change that system, or at least to modify that system so that it generates better results, so that more people can get over. Fast forward to your college years. We're talking about, and again, Maurice said, getting through college, how to get over through college. Public policy is probably one of the most important things we can look at in terms of looking at the way our country shakes out and the way that we live. But it's not the only thing. We want to look at other kinds of changes in terms of technology. We want to look at the whole issue of entrepreneurship and whether it can work for you or not. Are you going to own a small business or a small business? And do you know what the difference is? A business is not a business. And then if you have a business or a business, is it going to be a vanity business or a lifetime business? Vanity business is just for you. You're living, or you're killing what you eat, and you're eating what you kill. But a legacy, a lifetime business is something you can leave to somebody. Everybody doesn't aspire to that, but it does make sense to pay attention to. Braiding hair in your room is not a legacy business. Fixing computers is not necessarily a legacy business unless you have a structure to figure out how to get more people to fix them for you. You pay them, keep the difference. Not exploitively, of course, but you pay them and keep the difference. So too many young people, not too many, but lots of young people, lots of your generation, and not many not so young people, have given up on the labor market in some ways and said, okay, instead of finding a job, I'm going to start me a business. And that's fine if you understand what a business is. It's a way of essentially exploiting surplus value.